It was a regular Monday morning in Chicago. Cold air, people rushing, coffee in hand, headphones on, moving through the same routine they followed every single week. And sitting inside a crowded train was a guy named Kevin, scrolling through his bank app without really thinking about it. Salary had just hit his account. For a moment, it felt good. That short feeling of progress, like things were moving forward. But within minutes, he started seeing the usual pattern. Rent gone, bills lined up, subscriptions deducted, groceries coming up, and then a series of small transactions he didn't even remember making. $4.95, $12.99, $7.40, $18.75. None of them looked serious. None of them felt like mistakes. Just normal spending. Coffee, food delivery, streaming services, small conveniences that made life easier. And that's exactly why they were dangerous, because nothing about them looked like a problem. Individually, they were harmless, but together they were shaping his entire financial life. Kevin wasn't broke. He had a decent job making around $70,000 a year. He paid his bills, saved a little, avoided big financial mistakes. From the outside, he was doing everything right. But every time he thought about building real wealth, hitting that millionaire level everyone talks about, it felt distant. Not impossible, just far, like something that belonged to another version of his life. And the truth is, it wasn't the big expenses holding him back. It wasn't some massive financial mistake. It was the small ones, the tiny leaks that never felt urgent enough to fix.
This is something most people completely misunderstand. They think becoming wealthy is about making more money or avoiding big losses. And while that matters, what actually shapes your long-term outcome is consistency. And consistency gets destroyed not by big events, but by small, repeated behaviors. Kevin didn't realize that his financial life wasn't being drained by one decision. It was being drained daily, quietly, in ways that felt normal. And that's what makes it dangerous, because you don't fight what you don't notice. He looked at his spending history more closely that day, not casually, but intentionally. And for the first time, he saw a pattern. Coffee almost every day, food delivery 3 to 4 times a week, subscriptions he barely used, small upgrades, convenience fees, random purchases that didn't feel significant at the time. And when he added it up, the number didn't look huge for a single month, maybe a few $100s. But when he projected that over a year, it started looking different. And when he thought about it over 5 years, it became uncomfortable. Because now it wasn't just about spending, it was about potential. That's the part most people ignore. Every dollar you spend is not just money leaving your account. It's money that could have been working for you, growing, compounding, building something bigger over time. And when you spend consistently on things that don't create value, you're not just losing money, you're losing future opportunity. Kevin started thinking about it differently, not in a restrictive way, not blaming himself, but understanding the system. Because the world around him is designed to make small spending feel invisible. Apps make it easy. Payments are automatic, subscriptions renew without effort, and convenience becomes the default. You don't feel the loss in the moment, but over time, it adds up. And psychologically, this creates a false sense of control. You feel like you're managing your money because you're not making big mistakes, but in reality, your money is slowly slipping through patterns you don't question. This is where the shift begins. Not in cutting everything out, not in becoming extreme, but in becoming aware. Kevin didn't stop buying coffee completely. He didn't cancel everything overnight. What changed was how he viewed those expenses. They were no longer just small purchases. They became decisions with long-term impact.
He asked himself a simple question. If I keep doing this for the next 10 years, where does it lead? And that question changes everything. Because most small expenses feel harmless when you look at them in isolation. But when you stretch them across time, they tell a different story. A story of missed growth, delayed progress, and potential that never gets realized. At that moment, Kevin realized something most people never fully accept. Becoming a millionaire isn't just about earning big money. It's about protecting small money. Because small money, when handled consistently, turns into big money over time. And small leaks, when ignored consistently, prevent that from happening. The uncomfortable truth is, most people don't fail financially because they lack income.
They fail because they lack awareness of their habits. And habits don't show up in big decisions. They show up in daily behavior. Kevin wasn't making bad choices. He was making normal choices. And normal choices, when repeated over years, lead to average outcomes. That realization hit harder than any financial advice he had heard before. Because it wasn't theoretical, it was visible in his own life. The gap between where he was and where he wanted to be wasn't just about income. It was about what he was allowing to happen every single day without thinking. And once you see that clearly, you can't go back to ignoring it. If you're listening to this and it feels familiar, that feeling of doing everything right but still not moving forward as fast as you should, then this is exactly where the real conversation begins. Because in the next part, we're going deeper into the exact tiny expenses that quietly drain your potential. Not the obvious ones, but the ones you don't question, the ones that feel normal, and the ones that are costing you more than you realize. If you want to understand money in a way that actually changes your life, not just your knowledge, make sure you like, subscribe, and join Andrew Finance, because what you're about to hear next might completely change how you look at your daily spending.
Kevin didn't change everything overnight. That's not how real financial shifts happen. What changed first was his attention. The way he looked at his daily spending became sharper, more intentional. And once he started paying attention, the patterns became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just random small expenses anymore. It was a system of habits quietly working against him. And the more he looked, the more he realized that these tiny expenses weren't really tiny when they were repeated every single day. The first one became obvious almost immediately: convenience spending. Not because he needed it, but because it was easy. Coffee on the way to work, ordering food instead of cooking, paying extra just to save a little time. Each decision felt justified in the moment. After all, it's just $5, just $10, nothing serious. But when Kevin looked at it over a month, it told a different story. Hundreds of dollars going towards things that didn't add real value to his life, just temporary comfort. And that's the trap of convenience. It trades your long-term potential for short-term ease, and it does it so smoothly that you don't question it. The second pattern was subscriptions. This one hit differently because it felt invisible. Streaming services, apps, small monthly charges that didn't demand attention. $10 here, $15 there, another $7 somewhere else. Individually, they felt harmless, but combined, they created a constant drain. And the worst part is, Kevin wasn't even using most of them fully. Some he forgot about completely. This is where psychology plays a big role. Once something becomes automatic, your brain stops treating it as a decision. It becomes background noise, and anything that becomes background noise is rarely optimized.
Then came the third one: impulse micro purchases. Not big shopping sprees, just small random buys. Something online that looked useful, something on sale that felt like a good deal, something he didn't plan but justified quickly. These purchases didn't feel like mistakes. They felt like rewards, like small wins. But over time, they created clutter, not just physically, but financially. Because every unplanned purchase takes away from something planned. And when those unplanned decisions happen consistently, they quietly replace your long-term goals. The fourth expense was more subtle: lifestyle creep at a micro level. Not upgrading everything at once, but slowly increasing the standard of what feels normal. A slightly more expensive meal, a slightly better version of something. Small upgrades that don't feel significant individually, but raise your baseline over time. Kevin realized that what used to feel like occasional spending had become routine. And once something becomes routine, it stops feeling like a choice. It becomes an expectation, and expectations are expensive to maintain. The fifth one was the hardest to notice: emotional spending. Not in a dramatic way, but in small moments. Spending when he was bored, when he was stressed, when he wanted to feel better. It wasn't about the money, it was about the feeling. And that's why it's powerful, because you're not solving a financial need, you're responding to an emotional state. And when that becomes a habit, it creates a cycle where spending becomes a default reaction instead of a conscious decision. As Kevin saw these patterns clearly, something important shifted. He stopped looking at his expenses as isolated events and started seeing them as behaviors. And behaviors are what shape outcomes. Not one big decision, not one big mistake, but repeated actions over time. He didn't try to eliminate everything. That's where most people go wrong. They try to become perfect overnight, cut everything out, and then burn out. Kevin took a different approach. He started reducing instead of removing, making small adjustments that were sustainable. Brewing coffee at home a few days a week instead of buying it every day. Canceling subscriptions he didn't actually use. Pausing before impulse purchases instead of reacting immediately. Cooking more meals without completely giving up convenience. These changes didn't feel extreme, but they created a noticeable difference, not just in his bank account, but in his awareness. Because every time he made a conscious decision instead of an automatic one, he reinforced a new pattern. And patterns, when repeated, become habits. At the same time, he started redirecting the money he was saving, not letting it sit idle, but giving it purpose, investing a portion, adding to his savings, creating momentum. And that's where things started connecting. Because reducing small expenses alone doesn't make you wealthy, it creates space. And what you do with that space determines your outcome. Kevin also noticed something interesting about his mindset. The more control he had over his spending, the less he felt the need to spend. Because a lot of his previous behavior wasn't about need, it was about habit. And once the habit broke, the urge weakened. That's the psychological side most people ignore. Financial change isn't just about numbers, it's about breaking patterns that feel normal. Over the next few months, nothing about Kevin's life looked dramatically different from the outside. He still woke up at the same time, went to the same job, lived in the same apartment, followed the same routine most people around him followed. But internally, something had shifted in a way that started compounding quietly. Because once he became aware of those small expenses and began adjusting them, he didn't just save money, he changed the direction of his financial life. The first thing he noticed wasn't a big number in his bank account. It was control. That feeling that his money was no longer disappearing without his awareness. Before, he used to check his account and feel confused about where everything went. Now, he understood exactly what was happening. Every dollar had a purpose, even if it was small. And that clarity removed a level of stress he didn't even realize he was carrying. Because uncertainty is what creates anxiety, not just lack of money. At the same time, the money he was no longer wasting didn't feel like a huge amount on a monthly basis. Maybe a few $100s saved from cutting back on convenience, subscriptions, and impulse spending. But the difference was that money was now being redirected. And that's where the real change started. Instead of disappearing into habits, it started going into investments, savings, and opportunities that could actually grow over time. And slowly, something interesting began to happen. The numbers started moving. Not dramatically, not in a way that would impress anyone immediately, but in a way that was consistent. His investment account grew month after month. His savings reached levels he had never hit before. And more importantly, it kept building. Because he wasn't relying on motivation anymore. He was relying on a system he had created through small changes. This is the part most people underestimate. They think becoming a millionaire requires massive action, huge risks, or a big breakthrough. But what Kevin started realizing is that wealth is often built in a much quieter way. Through discipline that doesn't feel extreme, through consistency that doesn't look impressive in the moment, and through decisions that most people ignore because they seem too small to matter. His mindset also evolved in a way that made everything easier. Before, spending felt normal and saving felt like effort. Now it started flipping. Being intentional with money felt normal, and careless spending felt uncomfortable. And that shift is powerful, because once your default behavior changes, everything else follows naturally. You don't have to force yourself every day. You just operate differently. He also became more patient, not because he had no other choice, but because he understood the process better. He saw how small amounts, when invested consistently, began to grow over time. He understood that the money he was saving today wasn't just staying the same, it was working. And once you see that happening, even in small amounts, it reinforces the behavior, because now your effort has visible results.
Another change happened in how he viewed opportunities. Before, he used to think he needed a higher income to get ahead. And while increasing income still mattered, He realized that controlling his expenses gave him immediate leverage. It created room. And that room allowed him to take small risks, explore new ideas, and think beyond just maintaining his current lifestyle. He even started exploring ways to increase his income, but now from a different position. Not out of pressure, not because he was struggling, but because he had the capacity to try. And that's a huge difference. Because when you're financially stretched, every risk feels dangerous. But when you have margin, even small margin, you can experiment without fear. Socially, he began noticing patterns in the people around him. Conversations about money didn't change. People still talked about expenses, about needing more income, about wanting better things. But very few talked about controlling the small leaks. And that's when it clicked for him. Most people are focused on earning more, but they're ignoring what's quietly holding them back. And that's why their situation doesn't change, even when their income increases. There was a moment where everything came together for him. He was sitting at home, looking at his accounts, not doing anything special, just observing. And he realized something simple but powerful. He was finally moving forward. Not in a way that felt forced, not in a way that required constant effort, but in a way that felt natural. Because his daily actions were aligned with his long-term goals. And that's the real difference. Before, his goals and his habits were disconnected. He wanted to build wealth, but his daily behavior wasn't supporting it. Now, even small actions were contributing to something bigger. And when that alignment happens, progress becomes inevitable.
Kevin didn't become a millionaire in a few months. That's not how this works. But he built something more important, a system that could take him there over time. And that system wasn't based on luck or sudden success or extreme sacrifice. It was built on awareness, consistency, and control over the small things most people ignore. He also understood something deeper about money, that it's not just about how much you earn, it's about how much you keep and how effectively you use it. Because earning more without controlling your habits just increases the scale of your mistakes. But controlling small expenses while earning consistently creates momentum that compounds over years. Looking back, the biggest change wasn't the money he saved. It was the mindset he developed, the ability to see patterns, to question habits, to make decisions intentionally instead of automatically. Because once you have that, you can apply it to every part of your financial life. And that's the real message. Those tiny expenses you ignore every day are not just small costs. They are signals. They show you how you think, how you behave, and how you manage your money. And if you change those patterns even slightly, you change your entire trajectory over time. So if you're watching this and thinking your small expenses don't matter, understand this. They matter more than you think, not because of their size, but because of their consistency. And consistency is what builds or destroys wealth. If this changed the way you look at your money, make sure you like, subscribe, and join Andrew Finance. Because here, we don't just talk about making money, we talk about keeping it, growing it, and building a life that actually moves forward, one decision at a time.
If this video opened your eyes, make sure you subscribe, because what you learn today can save your future tomorrow.